Architectural discourse has been, historically, extremely Western-centric. Focusing, however, solely on the Western world ignores the unique and innovative design work that is found in countries like Nigeria. Nigeria did not gain independence from British imperialism until 1960. When Britain withdrew its control, a dialogue began between to address how the Nigerian culture, religion, and ideology could be expressed once again, and specifically how art could affect this transition. Nationalism was an essential aspect of Nigeria's life and culture under British colonial influence. The nationalist tradition and subsequent discourse of social reform and improvement inspired the Ibadan school in the 1960s and remained resilient through the later 20th century. The Ibadan school is key to understanding recent Nigerian culture, mostly due to the contributions of one of the school's faculty members, Demas Nwoko. Born in Nigeria, Nwoko worked as an artist and drama professor before transitioning from painting and sculpting to designing civic buildings on the latter half of his career. In the 1960s, Nwoko began to win design competitions, not for his paintings, but for his buildings. While we may instinctively separate these two phases of his career, Nwoko's buildings and structures are like a repetition of his art, a continuation of his career in painting and sculpting, rather than architecture in the traditional sense. The stylistic details of the facade and materials employed in his buildings creates an artistic quality that raises above the basic structure. This analysis seeks to contest a hard distinction between Nwoko's art and architecture and to propose a more fluid reading of his work that sees his buildings as an advancement of his art, not separate entities. Before he designed buildings, Nwoko was a founding member of the Zaria Art Society during his attendance at the Nigeria College of Arts, Sciences, and Technology. It was founded primarily to give his members a sense of direction as Africans and to foster discussions on Nigerian historical preservation in tandem with the arts. The central tenets of this group created the foundation for Nwoko's art, as they researched traditional folklore and synthesized cultures while preserving Nigerian traditions. Nwoko took special interest in recruiting architecture students to this society, claiming that the art should always be combined and associated with architecture. The Zaria Art Society was Nwoko's primary influence for his early career in painting and sculpture. Through the mode of the Zaria Art Society and his own personal interest in the arts, Nwoko was able to develop a rich array of paintings and sculptures, many of which shed light onto his later architectural works. In addition to exploring several artistic styles, Nwoko would frequently use his work as a vehicle for nationalistic expression, but specifically focusing on the social and political issues occurring during the time in Nigeria. Works like his painting titled Nigeria shows definite expression of political protest while still retaining a sense of artistic expression. In addition to utilizing the somewhat rigid yet figurative style throughout his portfolio of work, the connection between his painting and his later architectural work can be seen much more clearly. This can also be seen through his sculpture, most of which utilize the terracotta style. Even though much of his sculptural work represents human forms, this aspect of incorporating the earth and natural materials is clearly borrowed in Nwoko's architectural work.
Nwoko acknowledges the presence of fluidity between his structures and his art. He says, in response to the question of the origins of his interest in design, well, it's good to know that architecture is art, because without the building, you won't find walls to paint on anywhere in the world. Nwoko argues through the medium of building that art and architecture are one and the same. There are countless instances in Nwoko's work where the lines of art and architecture are blurred. A striking example is one of his more famous structures, the Dominican Monastery. Located at the Dominican Institute in Ibadan, the monastery was the first truly nationalistic architectural form after Nigerian independence. Construction began in 1970 and lasted until 1975. Budget constraints slowed construction and forced Nwoko to construct much of the complex himself. He incorporated raw materials that were native to Ibadan and integrated natural air circulation. As with all of Nwoko's structures, the monastery exhibits a fluid conversation between current Western architecture and the African cultural ideas that he grew up with. He used concrete and modern construction techniques, yet detailed the building with elements of symbolic African art. The scattering of the stained glass crosses that stand out on the wall of the monastery represent the cross of Christ, as well as other important martyrs in the Bible. One of the crosses is upside down, referencing the fact that Peter was crucified upside down. Around the chapel, there is a moat of water. This water symbolizes the baptismal aspect of purifying water. Today, this monastery is yet to be finished, which expresses that the church is always under reform and is never truly complete. The central chapel is a semicircle, which was justified by Nwoko as being akin to a theater, bringing priests and worshippers together. All of these details further Nwoko's value of art and symbolism as being central to design work. Nwoko, in his published work Art and Religion, commented that, "I have been greatly disturbed by the architecture of most of the new churches being built by the Roman Catholic Church in Africa today. We should insist on good architecture and artistic finishes that will create the desired atmosphere conducive to effective worship." Nwoko believed that art was essential to the experience of worship in the Dominican monastery. He accomplished this in diverse ways, using artistic finishes to emphasize the centrality of art to religion. Each of the timber columns in the building have been individually carved. The sculptural elements of the monastery are not just rooted in African culture, but based on both African and European religious traditions. Nwoko, in his book Art and Religion, says that the location of a religious center or shrine can always be designated by art. Additionally, Noah Moffat, an architectural critic, said that here, under a tropical sun, architecture and sculpture combine. Similar styles and techniques are used in the new Culture Studio and Residence. Constructed in 1967 just outside of Ibadan, Nwoko used local materials like clay, granite, and laterite with traditional techniques, using these local traditions to his advantage. He extracted elements from the African writing system for detailed design on the outside walls, and the approach to the studio is specifically designed to create an experience for the guests that frames the view of the structure. Even Nwoko's construction style lends itself more to art than to architecture. In all of his projects, he develops space in phases. He starts with a concrete frame that is then filled with local soil and sheet roofing. He then turns to the exterior with a more artistic touch, using carved wood, wrought iron, and sand-cast concrete. By allowing his artistic method to permeate even in his construction style, Nwoko continues to demonstrate that his buildings contain more stylistic similarities to his art than to traditional Western architecture.
In The Architecture of Demas Nwoko, written by John Goodwin, Demas Nwoko's stylistic motivations, history, and buildings are analyzed in depth. The author claims that to Nwoko, architecture should be an art. Goodwin meticulously describes and analyzes Nwoko and his buildings, yet he does not spend much time exploring his artistic origins. Hannah LaRue, a critic and academic in a similar field to Goodwin, criticizes this omission, stating that some more attention to his design process and its relationship to his beaux arts training in stage design in Paris would shed light on the link between the visuality of his painted works and his space-making approach. This review aptly realizes a discrepancy in the description of Nwoko's buildings. The Architecture of Demas Nwoko, authored by Goodwin, appropriately praises Nwoko for the spatial understanding in his buildings. Yet Goodwin fails to acknowledge where this understanding originated from and how it emphasizes a gradient in his artistic career rather than a shift. Without Nwoko's beginnings in art at the Zaria School, the Ibadan School, and his many paintings and sculptures, he would not have the foundation needed for his building designs. His artistic background is the primary reason his structures have been acclaimed and revered, so a sharp distinction between his art and architecture removes the interconnected nature of his career. Because Nwoko himself stresses the vitality of art to his buildings, categorizing his art and his buildings as separate entities disregards how Nwoko wanted to present his ideas. Nwoko's strong belief in art as a mechanism for social reform allowed him to experiment in his designs. In some sense, his focus on artistic practices and ideologies liberated him from traditional Western architecture. His use of art as a form of architecture allowed for modern building practices to convey the importance of Nigerian culture.